Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello again, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, Lisa Schlossberg, and today we are back again for solo series number 20. So, welcome to today. Welcome to this episode. And the first thought I had when I thought about, wow, we've made it to 20 is if you listen to, if you've made your way here with me, you heard me say, I think it was episode 10, I was talking about being a whole hand. When I turned 5 years old and my dad said, you are a whole hand. And when we got to episode 10, we had 2 whole hands. And this time we have 4 hands. So that's how my brain is working today. This is my first time back recording with my microphone. I don't know if you can hear a difference, but we are back in Brooklyn. We are back in the office. We are back with the microphone. We are back with Neville, who is the black cat sitting on my lap right now. So you might hear him at some point in this episode. This is the first time that I'm recording for video that I know of in real time in this apartment. So we're settling into this transition. I'm still wearing my emotional support beanie because I do find that helpful. It's very comfy, but I've never had to put the headphones on top of it. It's like a whole different experience. So anyway, welcome to today. My intention, we don't know how it's going to go, but my intention is that this is really going to be the last part before I get more granular about the intentional weight loss and more kind of concrete, I think it's all been moving in that direction, as you can probably tell. But there are some things, of course, that I need to come back to before I feel like it's ready. So that's what today's about. All right, let's dive in. Wait, before we dive in, I'm trying my best to remember to always remind you about the Omega Retreat. So if you're listening to this, let me plant the seed. July 12th to the 17th, come do this work with me in person with my guest instructors at the Omega Institute, which is like truly, truly a magical place. So that is the announcement. I don't want to forget. And now we can dive in. All right. So the first thing that I want to kind of come back to, following up on the last episode, is when I heard myself say, and I'm talking about how when I'm at the gym and I've talked about my exhaling and my grunting and my breathing and my closing my eyes and being in my own world and like all of that, I thought it was funny that I didn't include acknowledging my sweat. And I'm saying that because it's really extreme. It's so excessive. And I used to think that it was because of how much I weighed. And I do think that like growing up, when I sweat more than most of my friends, part of it was because I was twice the size as most of my friends, especially at sleepaway camp over the summer when it was really hot. And I used to be fairly insecure about it because it felt at the time like it was something that drew attention to my weight. I associated those two things together. And then I lost a lot of weight, and I definitely sweat more than the average person. And when I used to, just to give you an idea, when I used to teach group fitness classes at the gym years ago, like 10 years ago, I used to tell the classes that if they ever sweat more than I did, if anyone in the class sweat more than I did in the class, they would get a free personal training session with me. And for years, no one ever did. So when I think about, describing what my experience at the gym is like being in a social context and worried or not worried about how people are judging me, it's funny to me that I completely left out the fact that if I'm running on the treadmill doing sprints the way I've described it, it is covered in sweat, especially by the time I'm done with it, to the point where like I almost feel bad for the people who are on the treadmill next to me, because I notice like when I'm cleaning the treadmill off after I'm done with it, I'm also cleaning off the one to the right and the one to the left because sweat gets all over there too. So it's another thing that, people have. I noticed that people, it was really funny to me. One time I was on the Stairmaster, and I don't know if this woman, I kind of got the idea that the woman next to me on the machine next to me, English wasn't her first language. But it may have been. She may have definitely chosen this word intentionally. But she looked at me at one point and was like, you are pouring like rain. You are pouring. You are drenched. And I'm like, I know. And so it's something that I know other people get really insecure about, like potentially how much they sweat. And it's just another thing that I have come to. There is a part of me that feels like it's easier to accept and be comfortable with it because I am now in a thinner body, right? There is that kind of macro cultural component of it, because now it's not about my weight. It's not drawing attention to my weight, but it is very, I would say, noticeable. Like people have definitely made a lot of comments to me about it. And it's just another one of those things where, like if I go, for example, to a hot yoga class with a friend, I'm in that hot room for 35 seconds before I'm dripping head to toe. And people look at me like, how do you, like, I want to sweat like that. Sometimes it's, I want to sweat like that. I'm jealous that I don't sweat like that. And sometimes it's like, are you good? How are you, like, why are you sweating so much? And so anyway, the whole point is, right, like people are going to respond to things the way people respond to things. And this is something that I could see and have heard makes people feel really insecure about themselves. And it's just another thing that I have come to be in a relationship with, where it's like, judge it how you want. Like you can think that it's, as gross as you want. It's fine. It's fine. I'm at the gym. I'm an athlete. Yes, I'm sweating. Like it's fine. It just doesn't have that power over me at this point anymore in terms of, feeling insecure about it. And so I just want to also add that little kind of tidbit about all of it, because it just feels so incomplete to talk to you about the judgments of other people at the gym without including the fact that I'm literally dripping sweat essentially everywhere I go once I get started. But the other reason that, so I had to pause because Neville is now on the chair. If you're watching this, you see this is how life works when you're a cat mom. But the other reason I wanted to talk about sweat is because of how much my relationship with it has shifted. Because when I was in a bigger body, it felt like me sweating was something that I couldn't control. I was constantly sweating when I didn't want to be. And so when I first started working out, I hated it. And I was in a relationship with it where, because it was happening so often in undesirable situations and circumstances, it didn't matter to me that I was at the gym and that it was appropriate. I hated it. And I think I always went to the gym with like towels. And through consistently exercising, my relationship with sweat completely shifted, because I remember at a certain point having this awareness of like, well, yeah, you're sweating because you're exercising. This is the kind of sweat that you are choosing. Like this is on purpose. This is by design. And it actually, instead of it being something that I wanted to control and resist and eliminate and minimize, it became something that I actually like wanted. And I saw it as something that, like, it was a good sign, and it really sticks out to me because, and I'm going to say more about this later, but our conscious input really is very powerful, because when my input to myself consciously is that this is something undesirable, this is something I want to stop, this is something I don't like, I'm in that relationship with it. But the sweating didn't change. It just turned into a different story that is actually, this is something good. This is part of the experience. This is something I want. This is good news. Then my whole relationship with it changed, and it overall just made the whole experience of exercising way more enjoyable and peaceful. And at the beginning, it was just tolerable. I didn't enjoy any of it. I was just willing to continue doing it. But that was something that helped a lot. And so what I realized was, if this is helpful or any of you can resonate with this, is it's really a time and place thing. It's not and this is like, again, it's not all or nothing. It's not sweat is good, sweat is bad. I like it, I don't like it. It's a time and place thing. It's a circumstance thing, right? Because if I am getting dressed up to go out at night and I get on the subway in New York City and I'm sweating and I'm gross and it ruins my hair for the evening, no, I'm not enjoying that and I'm not going to want that. However, if I'm at the gym and I'm running sprints or I'm in a hot yoga class, hell yeah, I want to be sweating. And so it just, again, it's like these little tiny things where I notice not being stuck in all or nothing black and white, but to like, you know, get a little bit more nuanced with it, which is very on theme with a lot of where we're going. So that's 10 minutes on my relationship with sweat, which again, did not intend for, but I think it matters. Okay, next, the other thing that I want to clarify or elaborate on a bit when it comes to exercise is what I was saying about exercise being a stressor. Now, just as a reminder, just like all stress, stress is adaptive. Stress is helpful. We need stress. And we also obviously need stress relief. But stress is not a bad thing. Chronic stress messes with our health. But acute stress is what we're designed for. That's what allows us to, you know, get out there and kill the animal and then survive in nature. And then we get back into, you know, the cave and we recover and restore ourselves. But anyway, the point is we are designed to experience stress. It's not a bad thing. And so exercise is one of those things that is a stressor, and that's okay because we adapt to it, we grow, we get stronger, etc. But what I want to highlight and what I want you to pay attention to, because it's not just exercise, this is true for all things living with an animal brain in a human body and a social context, is that it's much less of a stressor when it's not life or death. When the perception is that, like I was saying in the previous episode, it's just exercise. It's just your workout. It's just a yoga class. It's not a big deal. The stakes are low, right? It's not life or death, and it doesn't mean anything about you. This is not an identity thing. When you can be in relationship with exercise where you are, yeah, you're taking it seriously. You're the one lifting the dumbbells so that your muscles can get stronger. You're the one taking it seriously and you're taking the action. But when you're also in a place of really low attachment to the outcome, what you're doing is embodying the energy associated with it's not life or death. So when you are using exercise as the mechanism through which you get to practice the embodiment of high attachment, high involvement and low attachment, that's where you get to, again, kind of lay this foundation for the high involvement, low attachment with something like intentional weight loss and beyond that. So think about, right, if you were to exercise and you're taking it so seriously that your mind-body system feels as though it's life or death, that's going to feel one way in your body because the stories you're telling yourself and the meaning that you're making of it are going to directly translate to the physiological experience that's going on in your body. But if you were to do the same exact workout with the energy of playfulness, like this is a game. There's no losing, by the way, right? You're just playing. You're being creative. You're in that energy of play and it's fun and it's light. That same exact exercise, right, that same exact workout, right, on the physical dimension, it's not different, but your physiology while you're doing it is going to be completely shifted because of what's going on in your head and how you are in relationship with it. So that's the other thing that you want to pay attention to is how much power your conscious input has, not just on what you're doing physically, but how that translates to the energy in your body and whether that feels safe or dangerous. Because like when I go to the gym, and if you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen this as much as you see me post about how much I sweat. That is, to me, the gym is a playground. Like I genuinely feel when I go to the gym, most days I feel like I'm in the playground. And that allows me to carry the low attachment energy with it. I'm still taking it seriously, but I feel safe because of the conscious input that I'm telling myself about the workout I'm doing. So the reason that matters, probably obviously, is also because that determines how sustainable or not it will be. And again, I'm not just talking about a single workout or a relationship with working out. I'm talking now also about something like intentional weight loss. But this is why high involvement, low attachment really matters, is because we're going for sustainability in addition to safety. And without making this an entire episode, because I genuinely could, I just have to say how often when I talk to people, especially people who have struggled with chronic pain, in their relationship with exercise, what comes up is it's not about the exercise being the problem in terms of what's going to stress you out or hurt your injury or something like that. It's not the actual exercise in the physical dimension that is causing pain or exacerbating pain. For so many people that I have worked with anyway, it is the way that they are being with themselves while they're exercising that is the predator. So again, that's what you want to pay attention to with all of this, is if you are someone that goes to exercise or you go to work out at the gym, and the way that you are in relationship with yourself when you go to do something like that is then all of a sudden you're being really judgmental and critical, and nothing you ever do is good enough, and you're completely dissociated because all you can do is think about objectifying your body. That's not like, that's a way bigger concern and a way bigger problem when it comes to you feeling safe in your body than the actual exercises at the gym. So I think ultimately the point that I want to make with all of this is that, yes, we have to talk about taking responsibility for what you're doing in the physical dimension, and we are going to get into it, but we also have to be taking responsibility for what's going on mentally and emotionally. Because again, if you're taking it so seriously that you are clinging to it and holding it really tightly, that's something that only you can do something about. We have to be aware of, again, the stories we're telling ourselves, the meaning that we're making of the things that we're doing. Having that be emotionally safe and recognizing that however it goes, you're going to be fine. This is not life or death. The stakes are so low. You're on a playground, right? That energy, when we integrate that, now, again, we can move. And so we have to be responsible for what's going on internally, as we are also taking responsibility for what's going on externally. And now that leads me to my next point, because another thing that I want to shout out here is what goes on in my body physically when I notice the kind of swinging of the pendulum like I talked about last time. Last time what I was saying was the idea of being, alert and relaxed at the same time. My mind hears alert and goes immediately to hypervigilant, right? And so it's like that swinging of the pendulum where if I'm trying to be present, right? I also shared when I am focused, my body reacts as though I'm angry. And it's like, no, we don't have to go that far, right? So another thing that I notice and practice when I'm exercising that I just want to, make really clear is I notice the way that my body does that swinging of the pendulum. It gets too tight, it gets too contracted, and I start holding tension in areas of my body that I don't need to be. So I gave you the example of when I was a personal trainer and people used to sit on the row machine and do this like pulling back motion and their shoulders would go up, right? So I'm noticing that on other people, sure, but I'm noticing that on myself to this day. And so what I have to practice doing is acknowledging that, yes, the exercise I'm doing is causing some discomfort in my body. But in addition to that, it is my job to make sure that I'm not adding more stress and contraction to my body while it's happening. So the same way that when I tell myself I want to stay focused on my workout, but I don't need to go as far as the contraction of anger, the same is true when, for example, I'm telling myself, okay, I'm going to do a bicep curl with this dumbbell, but I don't need to excessively grip to it while I'm doing it. And so it's this ongoing practice. So as I'm sharing, with you, this idea of integrating the high involvement, low attachment energy, I'm using my workouts as a way to become aware of that and to practice that. Because when and this is the whole thing, when we get uncomfortable, we respond with more contraction and tension, right? Because we're designed to avoid discomfort. We are designed, because our brains are brilliant and designed for survival and safety. When we get uncomfortable, we are automatically, habitually, instinctively moving in the opposite direction of discomfort, which totally makes sense. It just really messes us up when all the growth and evolution and freedom and peace that we want exists outside of the comfort zone. So this is the root of all of it, is that when I start feeling uncomfortable, because what I'm doing is literally shredding up my muscle tissue while I'm lifting weights. That's what's happening, by the way, is if you are lifting weights, for example, what you're doing is you're ripping up muscle tissue. And then as it repairs itself later, that's how it gets stronger and bigger. That's what's happening. So when I'm exercising and I know that what I'm doing is intentionally, on purpose, creating discomfort, that's what I'm doing, right? I then get to practice, let that part of my body be uncomfortable. Let that part of my body, if I'm doing a bicep curl, for example, I want the discomfort in my bicep. That's exactly what I'm going for. But I don't want the discomfort in my forearm that is coming from gripping to the weight as though I'm going, it's life or death. So it's my job and it's my responsibility to stay present in my body for the kind of appropriate discomfort and tension and contraction, right? When I'm lifting weights, I'm literally contracting my muscle on purpose. But what I have to make sure of is that I'm contracting the muscle that I'm working and not the rest of my body, which is the same thing as when someone sits on the row machine. Yes, you are working your back muscle. So if you start feeling it in your back muscle, that's exactly what you want. However, while you're doing that same motion, you don't want to be contracting your shoulders. You don't want to be lifting your shoulders up. So that's, again, why exercise to me, if you are connecting your mind to body, which you can do in all kinds of exercise, is really an opportunity to practice the embodiment piece of all of this. Because when you're exercising, or when I'm exercising, it's a practice of saying, I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's uncomfortable. And actually, it is supposed to be. And that is very much, again, like my relationship with sweating, where it's oh, I'm so sweaty. And it's yeah, you're at the gym. You're supposed to be. It's part of it. And that helps rewire the relationship to discomfort. It helps rewire the relationship to discomfort because now it's oh, you're uncomfortable? Good. You're shredding up your muscle tissue. You should be uncomfortable. You are making this happen on purpose. This isn't happening to you. You are doing this for the sake of, your own benefit. Great, you're uncomfortable, but don't swing the pendulum where now your entire body is contracted. So what I get to do in this practice is literally meet discomfort with acceptance. Meet discomfort, meet the contraction of, in this example, the bicep, meet the discomfort in the bicep with relaxing the rest of my body, which again is that same energy of a strong, solid, straight spine holding me up with kind of mushy muscles in my body. But this is how I get to actually practice it in real time, Because then once you strengthen the muscle of responding to discomfort with acceptance rather than resistance, you have more of a foundation for tolerating the discomfort that comes up as a part of intentional weight loss. So that is how I coach myself through it. And I want to offer that to you, that if you are someone who, again, is moving or in a relationship with movement or exercise, notice where are you contracting in places that are not part of the exercise that you're doing, and then see if you can, right, keep the discomfort and the contraction in the part of your body that you want it to be in and relax the rest of it. Because that literally is, I can't think of a better example, honestly, of the physiological embodiment of high involvement, low attachment, which all of this is bringing me back to a quote that I share in module 11 of the coaching program, because that's where we talk about exercise. I definitely included this in the exercise episodes, but I want to come back to it because it's really important here. The quote is, I'm going to read this directly. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. This is Kelly McGonigal. Her TED Talk is also part of my curriculum. And, it builds on actually in a lot of ways what I was talking about last time about posture and body language and the messages that we send ourselves, right? So if you are, she talks about like, you maybe have heard of like the Wonder Woman pose, right? If you are about to give a speech or do an interview or something, very helpful to put yourself in your Wonder Woman pose, your hands on your hips, a strong straight spine, chin up, broad shoulders, open chest, things like that. Because when you're in that physiology, when you're in that body language, you are sending a message to your body and your brain that is not just that you're safe, but you're empowered, you're strong, you're proud. That's the body language that goes with it. And then try this on right now as you're watching this or listening to this. Put yourself in that stance and notice how you feel emotionally, energetically. And then, kind of collapse a little bit. I always do this stuff at like retreats, like collapse your body a little, bring your shoulders in, give yourself the embodiment of like, insecure and small and wanting to hide. See how that feels. And so we're always communicating. We always have power with something like our body language. And, right, so you can do this physically. You could also do this mentally and emotionally because the mind-body connection. So the whole point is, watch her TED Talk, Kelly McGonigal. It's brilliant. And think about how this might apply when you are exercising and beyond exercise. Because if you view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. And the whole point here is when you start doing something uncomfortable, like exercising, you will start responding to that discomfort with contraction and tension, right? A lot of times this comes up for people who struggle with anxiety or have a history of like panic attacks or an anxiety disorder. When they start, disorder in quotes, but and I've seen this a few times, then when people start doing cardio and they're raising their heart rate on purpose, it can feel really scary and vulnerable because it feels like anxiety, right? And so the whole point is when you start to view your stress response, the response of contraction and tension and kind of resistance to the discomfort, when you view that as helpful rather than hurtful, when you are not afraid of that, when you're like, yeah, this is uncomfortable, and I notice that I want to contract my whole body in response to that, but that's just my stress response. That's my survival mechanism. Of course I feel that way. My brain is trying to protect me from discomfort, right? Like when you see it as helpful, you create the biology of courage. And so basically what I'm saying to you is that's what I get to practice when I'm moving, when I'm at the gym, when I'm exercising. I get to practice the embodiment piece of I am uncomfortable, I'm not unsafe. I can be highly involved and lowly attached. I get to practice it in my body with that. But you also can practice this at any point. Because if you are doing something, let's say you're doing something that is not physical, but still outside your comfort zone, potentially intentional weight loss, and we'll get there. If you are doing something like that that's making you uncomfortable, and you can remember that your stress response to kind of panic and freak out and try to control it and all of that stuff, if you can remember that that is just part of it, that's your stress response, it's being helpful, you're in the biology of courage, which allows you to get through it, essentially. Now, building off of that point, the other thing that I was thinking of when I was listening to all this is titration. Titration is basically the idea that, in trauma therapy, for example, you titrate the memory, the experience, the emotion, the feeling, because we don't want to overwhelm the system, because once the system is overwhelmed, you're not healing, you're collapsed. So titration is an important component of a trauma-informed intervention. So what I find really interesting about this, and I know, again, I said this at some point in the exercise episodes, but long story short, once we go through trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma, what happens for a lot of us is we, escape our bodies. We're not living in our bodies. This is all kind of a review. We get out of our bodies, we're in our heads, and where we end up feeling safe and comfortable are very high highs and very low lows. So the sympathetic arousal of fight or flight, or the freeze response of dorsal vagal shutdown if you're looking at polyvagal theory. But that's the idea, is we have really high highs and really low lows. And even though it doesn't feel good and we don't like it very much and it's not that comfortable, it becomes our baseline, which means it becomes our familiarity, which means it becomes our safe space. And our brain will always choose the familiar hell over the unfamiliar heaven. So we're constantly manufacturing ways to go from really high highs to really low lows, even though we don't like it very much. Okay, so that's review. Now, the reason that I'm bringing it back here now is because one of the things that I do to practice accessing that nuanced kind of gray area space where it's not all or nothing, it's not black and white, it's not fight or flight or freeze, but more the presence and balance. One of the ways I actually practice that is when I'm doing something like running sprints on the treadmill. So I'm going, like, that's a high stress experience. I'm running as though I'm literally running from a predator. And then I, like I mentioned, kind of jump off to the sides. I let my body recover, and then I do it again. And that's how I do intervals. But here's the thing. What most people will find themselves doing is dissociating, especially in the moment. This is what I want you to think about. In the moment where I hop off the treadmill, my feet are on the sides of the treadmill, and I just finished running as fast as I possibly can for like 20 or 25 seconds. It's in that moment that I think most people would check out and dissociate because it is so uncomfortable. Now, here's the thing. When I'm in a really high, like running that fast, it's like, it's literally like running for my life where I can't think about anything else. Like, I have to be focused and present on the fact that I'm running, because if I literally let anything else come into my mind, I will fall off the treadmill. So that's really high, but I can be kind of present in that. And then the low would be essentially just like, maybe after my workout, once it's all said and done, or my heart rate comes all the way back down. And anyway, but the point I'm trying to make here is it's in the in-between that we need help, right? We need practice getting into that in-between, because a lot of us know how to be in really high highs or really low lows. We know how to be sympathetically aroused, fight or flight. We know how to collapse into freeze. But what's challenging is the embodiment of that energy in the middle. And I'm going to explain to you why this matters so much if it doesn't already click. But that is one example that I just want to share with you about how I practice it, is I'm very mindful to keep myself present in my body when the sprint is over, because that is the moment, as my heart rate is coming down, as things are slowing down, as my my brain is realizing that like there is no actual predator behind me and I'm safe and I'm at a gym on a treadmill. As things are coming back down, that is where most of us will, again, check out. So I'm very mindful in that moment to stay with my breath. This is really where I close my eyes a lot, is I'll hop off the treadmill and I'll close my eyes to stay focused on what's going on inside my body as things are slowing down, as my heart rate's coming down, as I'm taking deeper breaths, because that, again, is the physical embodiment practice of being in that gray area that we're ultimately all looking for, in between the sides of the pendulum. So the reason that this matters so much to me in this context, as we're about to talk about intentional weight loss, is because ultimately, like I said, I feel as though diet culture is a reflection collectively and culturally of sympathetic arousal. It's fight or flight. And the energy of being like on a diet, right, where it's like rooted in fear and judgment and scarcity and what you can't have and how you're not good enough and, insecurity and all of those things, that's fear. That's coming from fight or flight, that fast, fearful energy. Okay, fine. That's diet culture to me. And then because that was unsustainable, and it felt really shitty, culturally and collectively, we swung the pendulum over to kind of more of a freeze, shutdown, collapse. And to me, that is reflected in kind of anti-diet culture and discourse, where a lot of it is just, to me, anti-diet culture is the direct reaction to diet culture. I mean, obviously. But what it's saying is essentially, fuck that. It's still not grounded in balance, freedom, right? It's a reaction to something else, which means it's not actually rooted in personal freedom, in my opinion. And so I do think, like I said, we could take the best and leave the rest from both sides. Diet culture, for a lot of us, like for me, I think about when I first started on Jenny Craig, very indoctrinated by diet culture, but I did learn how to eat. It did give me nutrition information and education that I didn't have before. We could take the best from that side. And anti-diet culture, right, was basically saying we can leave this whole story behind that if we just lose weight, all our problems will be solved, and that our worth is tied to our body shape and size. Also great. However, when I'm talking about safe, sustainable, intentional weight loss, neither of the sides of the pendulum are going to get us there, because neither sides of the extreme, neither energy is going to get us there. So we have to be practicing the energy and the embodiment that lives in the middle of that pendulum, where it's high involvement, low attachment. It's not diet culture. It's not anti-diet culture. It's not obsessive and being hyper fixated. It's not obsessive and controlling, but it also is not neglectful, right? And that is how it all kind of comes together. But the point here is that balanced approach to something like intentional weight loss will not really be possible to access or sustain if you are not in embodiment of it. Again, the whole point about all this is it can't just be a theory. It can't just be a concept. It has to be in your actual body, the felt sense that if you are not in either extreme, you are still safe. And that is something that's not going to happen overnight, but we get to chip away at and gradually create safety around. And one of the ways that I do that is the way that I'm very intentional to be in my body while I'm running sprints, for example. So it's that theory of kind of titration, a little bit at a time, similar to kind of like an exposure therapy of being in your body as it's uncomfortable on purpose. And even when I just hear myself say that, being present in your body as it's uncomfortable on purpose has everything to do with you being able to sustain intentional weight loss, period. because there are going to be moments with intentional weight loss, just like anything else worth having, anything else you need to work for. There are going to be moments where you're uncomfortable and you don't like it, and that's fine. But the whole point is, if you can accept and understand that your discomfort is appropriate, it's okay. The same way that when I'm working out, it's like, oh, your muscles hurt? Yeah, good. You're working out, right? If you know that your discomfort is part of the journey, you're putting yourself in that position on purpose. You're doing this with intention. It has a greater purpose to it all, right? Now, if you can be present with yourself in that, tender self-compassion, this is a moment of suffering. This is hard. This is uncomfortable. If you can be present with that and integrate the tender self-compassion and be embodied with it, now you have the pairing of taking action, fierce self-compassion, with the presence and the safety of tender self-compassion. So it's being in your body as it's uncomfortable on purpose. And again, you could do this with exercise, the way that I get to practice this constantly, but you could do this in any other realm, right? It doesn't have to be physical. The whole point is that you are staying in your body with yourself, with the energy of acceptance, non-attachment, love, compassion, while it's uncomfortable, so that you can move in the direction you want to move in. So to sum it all up, I'm just going to read what I wrote here because that is helpful for me. I'm practicing staying present for the in-between so I can create embodied safety with the balanced energy. And that's the whole thing. If you want a sustainable, safe, mind, body, soul, lifelong approach to something like intentional weight loss, what you're looking for is balance, right? And so the energy of balance needs to feel safe to you. And if all that feels safe to you right now is the extremes or the sides of the pendulum, your practice is essentially this. And I'll also just add here, this is why, to me, in a lot of ways, the discipline, like I talked about in a previous episode, the discipline I'm talking about here is not just the discipline to move your body a certain way or work out a certain way. I'm talking about the discipline of staying present in your body. I'm talking about the discipline of your mindset. I'm talking about the discipline of the way that you talk to yourself. These are the things we have to discipline, because in this example, the discipline to work out despite discomfort is the same discipline that I use to meditate despite discomfort. And that's really important, because I'm not talking about being present with yourself so that you can practice discipline from a place of judgment and fear and shame and inadequacy. It's practicing discipline from a place of growth and strength and bravery and courage. And that is decidedly different. And again, if you are going into something like the gym or your life, and when you try to be disciplined, and again, this has everything to do with intentional weight loss. If your relationship with discipline is that it feels as though you're immediately like doing something wrong, or that you're not good enough, or, you know, if it's that story, that's old. That's old. And we can release that, because the same, again, it's like if you are thinking about disciplining yourself while you're exercising, and it feels as though it's coming from outside of you, like you don't have choice or power or freedom, like discipline has taken on the meaning that you are inadequate, then that's going to create the energy of danger and fear, and that's not sustainable. But when you think about, like when I'm working out and I'm uncomfortable, that is the discipline, the same discipline that I use when I'm meditating and my mind wanders and I have to bring myself back. And then my mind wanders and then I bring myself back. I have to be disciplined in that practice mentally. And it's the same kind of thing. It's coming from a place of when my mind is wandering and I have to bring myself back, I have to take responsibility for doing that, right? No one else can do it for me. But the purpose and the intention of it is that I have the power to practice being present with myself while I'm uncomfortable. And it's not because I have to, or I should, or I am weak if I don't. It's because I have the power to. It's because I believe in myself too. It's because I know it's uncomfortable, but I don't have to shy away from discomfort. It's because it's hard. Yeah, well, I can do hard things. It is literally the energy of the physiology of courage. That's what it is. And so that's an important point here too, is if you notice that your response to discomfort is there's so much to say about this, but if your response to discomfort is, if I loved myself, I wouldn't put myself through that. You're confused. You're confused because that's not how it works. And this goes back to the earlier episodes on fierce self-compassion, right? You in a meditation, right? Let's use meditation as an example. If your mind wanders, and you're like, well, it's uncomfortable to practice discipline, to bring my mind back into the present moment, then that's the energy of collapse. That's the energy of complacency. That's the energy of learned helplessness. That is the energy of that side of the pendulum, right? To me, it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. And it's like, yes, there is. Yes, there is. You can practice it. So again, if exercise and working out is not really the realm for you, it doesn't matter because it's the same practice and it's the same principles as practicing discipline when you're meditating. And it's like you have to put work into that. You have to discipline your mind for that. And discipline is not a dirty word. So again, this has everything to do with intentional weight loss because along the way, in my experience, you won't have to be overly rigid or overly anxious or perfectionistic. You don't have to bring any of that stuff. But being in the middle of the pendulum is sometimes to practice the discipline of being present in your own discomfort. And that's part of, again, just taking responsibility for where you want to go. If you want to have more peace and focus and embodiment in your life, you're not going to give up on the practice of bringing your mind back into the present moment while you're meditating. This is the same exact thing. Okay, having said all of that, the other thing I want to come back to that I brought up in the last episode about not pairing your habits, your preferences, what you like and don't like with your identity and sense of self. So again, the idea, like what I was experiencing was, if I feel like if I have to turn the music off while I'm working out, I don't need to go through a whole identity crisis about like, what does this mean? I usually am someone that likes music and I don't have to be married to every time I'm working out, I'm playing music because it doesn't always work that way, right? So it's not, I am someone who listens to music when I exercise. It's like, I don't know, we'll see how I feel today. I just want to come back to that point because this really is true for, again, anything. This reminds me of when I started doing yoga because I was such a gym rat at the time. All I did was like lift weights and do cardio, and then I started doing yoga. And in yoga classes, this is where I experienced, and I started again to be able to embody that just because I could do a pose yesterday doesn't mean that I'm going to nail it today. And to not have that expectation of myself or set that standard for myself that just because I did it one day, it's going to happen the next day. Or just because I felt this way once doesn't mean I'm going to feel that way again. So I want to bring this back because this example of having a day or a moment or part of an exercise or part of a workout where it feels better to turn the music off, and how, like I said previously, this has a lot to do with your relationship with food and how, being an intuitive eater is allowing yourself to tap into the present moment. What do I feel like now? What do I feel like today? It has a lot to do with not living in the past or the future. And the reason I'm bringing this back is because if you want to talk about eating intuitively, if you want to talk about having a relationship with food where your intuition is online and you are actually in your body enough to be in relationship and in communication and in connection with it enough that food and eating feels, you have guidance around how to eat and what to eat. If that's the kind of relationship with food that you want, when I say intuitive eating is part of intuitive living, and they go hand in hand. That's what I'm really talking about. That's what I mean, is intuitive living is allowing yourself to be in the present moment, allowing yourself, the word that keeps coming to me when I think about this is fluid. Fluid. Like, you don't necessarily know, the examples that I gave about tomatoes and bacon. Like, am I going to want to eat those things? Well, I don't know. I have to check in with myself. I have to actually be in my body enough to ask that question and receive an answer. So that's how it all, again, just kind of ties together, is it's not just not having an identity crisis over and over again, because anything tied to your identity becomes life or death. So you want to think about keeping the stakes real low, right? So you're safe either way. So it's not about your identity, but it's not just about all of that. It's also about the fact that if you want intuitive living, intuitive eating, it requires you being present, which requires you feeling safe. You have to feel safe in your body to drop into the present moment. And then that's where, again, those guidance and answers can come. And not from anyone outside of you, but because you are present with you. And that's why for me, when it comes to intuitive eating, it's not just listen to your body, like eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. It is way more than that. And that, again, kind of goes back to the earlier episodes of this whole series. Okay, so having said all of that, I think the last point, even though there's like 4 or 5 bullet points for this, is I want to talk about, similarly to how I wrapped up the last episode, the other pendulum swing that I've seen happen a lot, where, in the previous episode, I was talking about people constantly saying, I've done all this emotional work. I've done the inner healing stuff. Why haven't I lost weight yet? And so the pendulum swing that I've seen many times is, first, everything is a physical problem, or we think that everything is a physical problem. And this is really true, especially around, again, chronic pain or the TMS kind of approach. And what I've seen many times in that community is everything, we start off thinking everything is physical because that's what we think, right? If you have back pain, for classic example, you think there's something wrong. Maybe you have a herniated disc or a bulging disc or something like that, right? It's a physical problem. So you do all the things, you go to the doctors and the medications and the surgeries and the injections and the physical therapy and all that stuff, right? Everything is physical. And then maybe you stumble upon this work and you kind of swing the pendulum. This is what I want to talk about. I've seen a lot of people swing this pendulum where, maybe you start doing some of the emotional work and your pain is alleviated. Maybe your pain is gone. And then, and I've lived through this myself, where then it feels like the physical dimension has no credit at all whatsoever. Like, we swing the pendulum and it's like every single thing that happens is emotional. Everything that happens is spiritual. Everything that happens is something going on internally. And then there's like a complete rejection of not just like surgery and doctors and the medical model, but kind of like all things physical. And so I recently had posted on Instagram something along the lines of, you can't just survive on coffee and protein bars and call it a mind-body syndrome. You can't call your digestive issues a mind-body emotional issue. We have to be doing both. We have to look at both. And this is, I want to acknowledge and validate that it makes it a lot trickier. It makes it a lot trickier to acknowledge that you're a physical being and you're also an emotional one, and that it's both at the same time. It's all of it at the same time. It makes it trickier. Yes, potentially. And I want to speak to that, because what I'm seeing over and over again is that swinging the pendulum to only doing the emotional work and not looking at what's going on physically is not helping you. So kind of like, I said last time, you could be so compassionate and non-judgmental and accepting and loving of yourself emotionally. But if you are still not eating in a caloric deficit, you're not going to be losing weight. It's imbalance. It's an imbalanced approach where all the time, energy, focus is going internal, but there's none going external. And the same is true for a lot of people who might say, I'm doing all the journaling, but why do I still have digestive issues? And it's like, I don't know, if you're living on coffee and protein bars, you can't really journal that away. And again, I say this from personal experience, but it needs to be, I think, called out and explicitly discussed, because if you want something like intentional weight loss, you have to do both. You have to do both. And I'll also just share here, I know I put it in the one of the workshop mastermind things that I did recently, but I gave the example of how, like, I woke up one day, I may have said this actually on a previous episode, but I woke up one day, it was like a few months ago, and I immediately, like, my stomach was so off, you know, and I'm an IBS girly. Like, that's how I got into all this stuff. So for me, having digestive issues is like, I mean, it's not foreign to me whatsoever, but I like feel like, oh, I'm so off. And my body is like, I don't know what's going on in my body. And I noticed my immediate reaction was, as usual, right? Fear and concern. Like, what's wrong? What needs to be fixed, right? We respond to discomfort with fear. It's inevitable. It's okay. We're not doing anything about that. What we want to be aware of, right? It's not your first thought. It's your second thought. Not your immediate reaction, but can you stay present to do something different? And so I thought about it, and I was like, you know, as I was questioning, why do I feel so bad? And what's wrong with my body? This like whisper came through that literally, it sounded exactly this way. Gee, I don't know. Maybe it was the 4 spicy margaritas and plate of nachos that you had for dinner last night. And it was like, oh, right. Of course. Like, the point is, I cannot choose certain things. I cannot choose to treat my body a certain way with what I choose to take into it. In this example, a plate of nachos and 4 spicy margaritas for dinner when I hung out with friends. I cannot choose to do that and then wake up the next morning and look at my body feeling uncomfortable as though it's doing something wrong or respond in fear. And so what I'm saying is, a lot of times what I'm noticing is that there are just unrealistic expectations, right? Is that I will do all the journaling and meditating. I will do all the self-compassion and radical acceptance, and then the weight will just fall off my body. No, it won't. In a lot of cases, no, it won't. What you have to do is create all the emotional safety with those tools and practices and skills. Yes, you have to do that. And you also have to look at, like I said previously, what are you eating? What are you choosing? What are you drinking? Where are your calories? What kind of macros? And again, you don't have to get overly rigid. You don't have to be a perfectionist about it. You don't have to be so controlling and hyper fixated on every single morsel of food that you eat. You don't have to do it that way, but you do have to be highly involved. You do have to be aware. You do have to be awake. You do, physically and emotionally. So I'll just read you a couple of the things that I have written down here that are just, this is how it came to me in my head. If you want to drive the car, you have to take responsibility for stepping on the gas. This is about taking ownership and responsibility without pressure, urgency, fear, lack, etc. Okay? So that's the idea. If you want the car to drive, I love the metaphors of driving a car. If you want the car to drive, you have to step on the gas, right? A lot of people, I think, are kind of hanging out in the passenger seat wondering why they're not driving. Why isn't the car moving forward? And it's like, well, if you're sitting in the passenger seat, the car doesn't move forward. You have to be in the driver's seat, which means you have to know how to drive. That's what a lot of this is about, is how do you drive? How do you drive the journey of intentional, sustainable weight loss? Yep. You have to drive it because it doesn't do itself. And so that is another thing that I just kept thinking about, was having this conversation. I'll never forget this in Aftercare, which is the alumni community for Out of the Cave clients. Rest in peace. We love Aftercare. But I remember being on one of those calls, having conversations like this, where I was just, very gently but directly calling my people forward, and calling them out in some ways. That is, why do you expect, like, the theme that keeps coming up is you want intentional weight loss, but you don't want to be intentional. So how do you expect it to happen? You don't want to look at what you're eating. You don't want to pay attention to what's going on in the physical dimension. What is the expectation? How do you expect weight to come off your body if you want nothing to do with it? How do you expect the car to be driven if you are closing your eyes in the passenger seat. It's just, and it's not about good or bad or right or wrong or being judgmental about it. It's just, again, about expectations. What is it that you expect? And so I'm remembering that in this aftercare call, one of my clients said very directly and specifically, I'm expecting the outcome. I'm expecting something to be different. I'm expecting things to happen, but I'm not doing anything to make them happen. And it was like, yes, bingo, bingo, bingo. And that awareness is a huge place to start, right? And this is why we talked about the stages of change, where it's like if you are in pre-contemplation and you're still in a place of kind of like pushing it away, denying it, not looking at it, how do we expect action to happen? And that's where most of us are. We're going from pre-contemplation to action, or we want to be anyway, and we're wondering why we're not. And it's like, well, have you contemplated it? Have you marinated at all? Are you preparing anything? Like you, like it's not going to happen that way. And so we have to have realistic expectations, not just about what's going on internally, but also what's going on physically, externally. And this, again, is why we have to be, I think, mindfully practicing the embodiment of the energy of high involvement, low attachment, where you're not being you're being intentional, you're being awake, you're looking at things, but you're not being a perfectionist about it. You're not being hyper fixated and focused on it. You're doing other things in your life. We have to practice the embodiment of that energy so we can have an approach to sustainable weight loss that is intentional and balanced. So the last thing that I'm going to say before I dip out to go to a yoga class is it all kind of comes full circle for me in a lot of ways back to what I was sharing in, I think it's like the literal first episode before I even started calling them a solo series. Remember when I thought this was going to be like 3 or 4 episodes? Hilarious. So what I'm reminded of is how, for me, it's this pairing, the marriage, the sacred union, let's say, of what's going on emotionally and spiritually internally with what's going on physically is how, for me, intentional weight loss really becomes spiritual. Where I talked about, the mind-body connection, doing yoga, a physical practice, but bringing your mind and body together is how the quote-unquote gates of the soul open. And so it is exactly this way that it becomes not just about your mindset and not just about what you're telling yourself and not just about the food and the eating and the calories and all of that, but it's this blend of when you bring your mind and body together through the journey of intentional weight loss. It, to me, is nothing short of a spiritual awakening. This is a spiritual journey. This is a spiritual approach because it literally has to be. Because if we are integrating the tender self-compassion, love, acceptance of ourselves, and we are bringing in that flexibility and spontaneity and empathy and understanding and all of that energy, if we are bringing that in, and now we're pairing it with intention and discipline and balance and willpower and tolerating discomfort, the fierce self-compassion of behavior change. It's very much like, again, everything is yoga. Life is yoga. It's very much like you're bringing your mind and your body together. And to me, that is where we access being a spiritual being. So I said it 20 episodes ago, 21 or 22 episodes ago, that if you want something like intentional, safe, sustainable weight loss, you have to be doing it from a place of understanding you are a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context surviving on food, period. We have to integrate our spirituality, our self, our capital S self, and using not just the relationship you have with food, but now using the journey of intentional weight loss as the mechanism through which you get to practice being embodied as a spiritual being. Whew! That's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. And that again is like, it really, to me, comes very full circle, because next, what I'm really going to start talking to you about is like, how do you do it? And I'm going to break down things about why intentional weight loss is decidedly different than dieting. And you know, again, the kind of how to do it. But this is what it all comes back to, is you're bringing the mind and body together. You are pairing the emotional work with the physical work. You are pairing tender self-compassion with fierce self-compassion. You are pairing high involvement with low attachment. This is how it's done. This is how it's done. And this is why I think you kind of have to be open to riding the wave and being on the journey, because this is the definition to me of spiritual. All right, so I'm going to close out this episode. The last thing I'm going to say is what I was just sharing reminds me again of Gary Vaynerchuk, who I've brought up at this point multiple times. But part of the reason I love Gary V so much is because, you know, I've already addressed, he's kind of polarizing. People love him, people hate him. It's fine. But part of the reason I love him so much is because he has a very, again, kind of masculine, fierce, some people might say arrogant and aggressive impression that he makes, and kind of energy maybe about him. But what I love about him is, or one of the things I love about him, is that he is constantly talking about love and empathy and compassion. So he, to me, like, he really gets it. He's doing it. He's talking about all these things in terms of like business and marketing and entrepreneurship and all of that stuff. I'm talking about it with food and eating. But the reason I think about Gary Vee is because so this is like, if you're not familiar with him, this is like an example, okay, is if someone's asking about like making profit or, you know, something like more granular business based, what Gary Vee will say, you know, and they're like, I'm trying this, I'm trying that, I've done this, I've done that. These are all my like business strategies. Gary Vee's philosophy would be, why don't you practice actually giving a genuine fuck about your customer and see how that goes? Like, so he can like, he voices it that way. But what his message is why don't you practice love and care and empathy and compassion? Why don't you think about the fact that you can actually serve people and help people? And, you know, why don't you practice caring about the person on the other side and see how that goes for your business plan? So that's part of why I love him. But anyway, okay, the reason I'm saying this is because essentially, I mean, we're saying the same thing, right? But I think about years ago when I listened to him speak, and he was like, I didn't think years ago when I first started doing this, I didn't think that I was going to be out here talking to you about self-love and empathy and compassion. But I've seen over and over and over and over again that I can give you all the tools and all the skills and I can give you a straight up strategy for your business. I can tell you exactly what to do to turn profit. I can tell you all of those things, but it doesn't work if those things are not paired with like genuine love and compassion. And so he would say, like, I've learned over and over and over again, people don't need strategy. People don't need plans. People need this kind of message. And so here I am. I thought that I was going to be talking to you about marketing and business strategy, but what I'm talking to you about is empathy, love, and compassion. And I didn't think that I was going to be doing this. This is not where I saw myself. These are not the speeches I thought I would be giving. But hey, I know what people need to hear at this point. And that's how I feel. Where like, I did not think, 10 years ago that I was going to be here being like, guys, intentional weight loss is a spiritual journey. You got to access your intuition. This is about being a spiritual being. This is, this is the farthest thing from my fucking mind. I did not in a million years. Like I said, and you've probably heard me share before, I didn't think I had a spiritual bone in my body. But you know what? After the last 10 or so years, after losing 150 pounds and keeping it off without an eating disorder, after every single thing that I've learned and been through, it's like, you know what? At the end of the day, if what I need to do is shine the light on and give a voice to the fact that safe and sustainable weight loss is really a way for you to access embodying your spiritual self, for you to come back home to yourself. If I have to talk about how safe, sustainable, intentional weight loss is the mechanism through which you wake up and become present in your life and heal yourself and the rupture that has happened to you as a spiritual being, then so be it. That's what I have to talk about. That's what this is. This is not about food and eating. This is not about diet and exercise. This is about being on a journey with yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, physically, physiologically, so that you can live the life that you want, so you can take your power back and have your human life in a healthy body, in alignment with yourself. That's what this is about. So, did I think that this is what I was going to end up talking about all these years? Definitely not. But after all of it, that's really what it comes down to. So that's the last thing I'm going to say, because, again, we really have made it in so many ways. The next few episodes are going to be talking more granularly, more physically, so, we can move forward. All right, so I got to go to yoga. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it resonates and makes sense, of course. Please, if you have not already, rate, review, subscribe, and most importantly, share. Share this podcast with your people, and we can bring them out of the cave with us. Okay, I love you, and I will see you next week.